Hello again. This is part 2 of the IT140 Week 1 Lab Solutions. In this video, we're going to discuss Lab 1.10 Warm-Up, which is basic output with variables. So, as you're told in Zybooks, and you've been told in part 1 of this video, variables store values. They can store integers, they can store strings, and in this lab we're going to show how they can be used. The first part of the lab you're requested to simply output a user's input. So we're going to use the input statement that we discussed in part 1 of this video to capture some value that the user is going to input. Then we're going to take that input and square it and cube it. So think about this. That means the user's input must be a number. Now, something they don't tell you directly in Zybooks is that any input that you capture with the input command is going to be by default a string, which is like words, as we discussed in the part 1 of this video. So we can't add words together, we can't square them, but we can add and square and cube numbers. So we're going to have to do something with this input we're getting to use it as a number. We also are getting a hint here that we can square numbers by multiplying them by themselves, and you should remember that from basic mathematics. We can cube numbers by multiplying them by themselves 3 times. Squares 2 times, we multiply the numbers. Cubes will multiply the numbers 3 times. We can get a second user input and store it in a variable called user num, and we can output the sum and the product of this number. So this is kind of our goal and objective for the lab. Let's continue on. So this sample program shows what our output would look like if we do this correctly. So we're going to instruct our user to enter an integer, and we're going to print that here. We're going to accept a number like 4, and then we're going to print you entered 4, and then we're going to show this variable that the value that the user entered here, 4 squared is 16, and we're going to print and 4 cubed is 64. Then we'll have another example here where we enter another integer, and we'll accept 5 in this case, and then we'll sum it. We'll sum this second number with the first, and we'll print the value. Then we'll display the product here of the first and second numbers and print the product here. So here is the answer to this lab. So remember, we stated in part 1 of this video that we use variables to store values, and we can capture variables by using the input statement. Now here is something new. Look carefully at this command. The input statement that we learned about in part 1, we simply had input and parentheses here. We didn't have any values in it, but we can prompt the user to enter the type of value we want them to enter by putting a string inside of this input statement. So here we're telling them to enter an integer or a number, and then we're going to put this slash in here so that after this displays, the screen will advance to the next line. Our display will advance to the next line. So as stated in the first video, always kind of go from the right to the left. So we're going to prompt our user to enter an integer, and the way we've structured this string, it's going to advance to the next line after it displays to the console. So we're going to ask them to enter. We're going to display enter an integer. Then we're going to take what they enter and we're going to input it. We're going to convert it to an integer, and we're going to store it in this variable user num. Now notice, this value that we get here in the input statement, we're converting it to an integer. Here we're using the int function. It takes whatever is inside of the parentheses and converts it to an integer. We're going to get something for it to convert by using this input statement. and we're going to direct the user to enter an integer by putting this string inside of the input statement. So now our input statement will display a statement, capture the value, change it to an integer, and store it in this variable. Then we're going to print back to the screen, you entered. We're just printing this string, notice the quotes here. Then we're going to print the variable that we captured here. Now this is where we do the heavy lifting. We're going to print the user num that we got here. So if it's 4, we're going to print 4. And we're going to print the string squared is, comma, that means the next statement's coming. Then we're going to print the value user num times user num. Now this is different. You can actually do work inside of a print statement. And in this particular case, we're going to print the value or the product of user num times user num. And then we're going to print on another line the word and. We're going to print our user num variable again. Cubed is, we'll print this string, user num times user num times user num. And we're going to print exclamation point. So this will print the cube of the value, the result of this statement, and then it'll print another string. Then finally, we're going to print user num2, we're going to input user num2 in the same manner that we got user num. So we're going to prompt our user to enter an integer, and we're going to advance to the next line. That's what this is resolving. So we always kind of resolve what's inside the parentheses and then move to the left. So we're going to display this. We're going to input the value that we capture after we display this as part of this input statement. We're going to turn it to an integer, and then we're going to put it in this variable. Then we're going to print user num, which is the value that we got here, plus user num2, which is the value that we got here, is, this is a string, user num plus user num2. This is the product. Then we're going to print user num, and then this multiplication sign. So the first value times the variable value here is user num times user num2. So if you match the code up to what we were told to do inside books, we display to the screen enter integer, that's this. Here's the /n, so it advanced to another line. Then we're going to get, this is the user's input here, where the user enters number 4. Then we're going to print you entered, that's this, and then we're going to print the variable user num that the user entered here. Then we're going to print that user num, which is 4, and then squared is, and then we're going to print the result of 4 times 4, which is 16. Then here we are, and user num, which is 4 that we got here, cubed is, that's where this string comes from, and then 64 is the result. We're going to actually print the result user num times user num times user num. Then we ask the user to enter another number, enter another integer. That's this statement here. The user enters 5. Then we print user num, the first value, the plus sign, the second value, which is 5, is, and then we print the result of user num plus user plus user num2. Then similarly, we print the product, and you can pause the video and look at this carefully. So here we are in Python Anywhere, an online Python interpreter that I'd like to use, and here's our program. So you can pause the video and kind of compare this to what we entered before, but here's all of our code that we just discussed. So let's run this program. So notice how we're asked to enter an integer. So let's use the same values that we did in our sample. So we're going to enter, well, let's just enter 5. So here we have you entered 5, 5 squared is 25, and 5 cubed is 125. So you can align it with these values here. Now it says enter another integer. So our program has advanced to here. And let's enter 6. So now we go to the next statement. You can see that it's executed here, and our program has run. You can see the final execution.